So, Tiger, thank you so much for being here. We appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you for having me. I'm super excited. And I feel like my clinical practice is like one third training and education, one third my own therapy, and one third improv. Because it's that same improv of like you're on stage, you're listening to everything, and then you listen to how you feel inside, and then you respond, right? And that's the same thing in therapy. So I use it every single day, all day long. So
Um, one bit of housekeeping. This is being recorded. I'm so glad that so many of you from all over the planet have joined us live here. But we did hear from a lot of those that were not able to do it, either because they'd be on airplanes or asleep. So we are recording this, and we'll have a link available to our YouTube page for people to join us to watch this at a later date. Tiger, you talked a little bit about your clinical practice. There was a time in which you used improv directly in your practice. Is that right?
yeah, more in my internships and like my pre-doc internships and things in prison and with people with schizophrenia.
Two notably easy places to teach improvisation, I imagine.
Well, everywhere I think is an easy place. It teaches itself. One of the greatest things was so I was an intern in this prison, and so I wanted to do improv, and all the people were like, I don't know. Because like in prison, you can't yell, you can't touch each other. There's like so many things you can't do. So I adapted, and then the inmates would took it back to the unit and taught the other guys, and so improv it just naturally teaches itself.
Self-generating and spreadable wonderfulness. Talk a little bit about, if you would, your dissertation. You wrote a book on the therapeutic benefits of improv.
Yeah, so when you get your doctorate degree in psychology, or I guess anything, you have to contribute something to the field. So you have to write about something that hasn't already been written about. And so improv had been written about in therapy before, but it was like, let's get up and do something, and then let's sit down and let's talk about what we learned. And I created a model that's more behavioral, so you don't have to sit down and talk about what you learned. The play itself is healing. And I saw this going through the Second City Training Center. There was a guy in the beginning, and every time he got on stage, this was a long time ago, this happened more than it does now, thankfully, but every time he got on stage, he would objectify every woman he was on stage with. And over the course of 18 months, whatever it was that made him do that was healed, I guess. And by the end, he didn't do it anymore. And he was seeing women as real people and, engaging with them in real ways. And the amazing thing about improv is, in order to be a good improviser, you need to develop the skills to like live well, right? So you need to know how to yes and trust and respect your partner, and there are no mistakes, and encounter one another and be in the moment and all that stuff, right? And so while you're learning these things because you want to be a good improviser, then you're just learning them, and then you can just go out in the world with these new skills and this new framework. So you don't have to like sit down and rub your nose in it.
You make me realize that with such a vast audience joining us, we should probably define some of these things. Improv, at its very base, I think a lot of people's first experience with it are shows like Whose Line Is It Anyway? It's a form of unscripted theater where you're taking audience suggestions, and by listening and working together and being affirmative, saying yes and adding to things, slowly, line by line, you create vivid worlds and scenes, and with hope, interesting moments between people who are moving closer together or further apart within the course of that scene. Generally used for comedy, but that's not how improv started, was it?
Yeah, so it started with Neva Boyd around the turn of the century, right? She was a social worker using it in Chicago. There were all these people coming from all over the world that didn't speak the same language, didn't have the same culture. And when the parents would go to work, the kids would just hang out in the streets and fight with one another. This is way before like any kind of all the protections we have for kids now. This was before that. And so she got the kids together and started playing games with them and started teaching them one another's songs, teaching them one another's games. So they had this shared culture that they were creating. And then someone who worked for her was Viola Spolin, and then Viola Spolin moved to Hollywood, and then she used the same games but to teach acting to kids. Then her kid was Paul Sills, and he started the Second City. And then SNL came out of that, and then here we are.
Here we are. Yeah. So yeah, generally used for comedy, but originally, far closer to its social and therapeutic roots that we're now, I think, more thankful for than ever. Let's talk a little bit about why we're having this conversation about mental health and about anxiety and social anxiety. Here are just a few of the 2024 numbers from the nonprofit Mental Health America, who studies this topic. These are summary numbers and don't dive into the inequities that exist for children who live in poverty and who experience trauma. Those numbers are even more pronounced for kids. But across the US currently, 1 in 5 children ages 12 to 17 report having a major depressive episode in the past year. 1 in 8 report having serious thoughts of suicide. Just over half of these children received treatment. That means half of them did not. And of those who received care, about a third say that it helped them a lot. Only 60% of American kids ages 6 to 17 are considered to meet the criteria for flourishing. That measure is trying to capture mental well-being, meaning that they show interest and curiosity about learning new things, they work to finish things they start, and they stay calm and in control when facing a challenge. How do you, Tiger, how do you think of anxiety and social anxiety?
Well, I think that anxiety in general is meant to protect us, right? So one time, a long time ago, I was taking something out of the oven and I brushed the top of the oven, I burnt my arm, right? So now every time I take something out of the oven, I have a little spike of anxiety and it's like, watch your arm, right? And so I don't think I've done it again. And so that's like what it's meant for, right? One time we saw a car on fire on the freeway. Every time which happens a lot in LA, but now every time we pass that, we're like, oh yeah, there was a car on fire there, right? So it's so that we can protect ourselves, right? And it works well for that. But I think it can cause problems when it's something that we're not in control of, right? So earlier today, I was like anxious. Oh my gosh, am I going to do a good job in this thing, right?
Me too.
And yeah, and so it's like, I mean, I guess I do have some control over that, right? So it's like, okay, well, you talk to Mark all the time, and you and Mark can riff for hours on this, so kind of don't worry about it. And then I had a little anxiety of like, I should really brush up on the numbers, and I was like, I'm not going to do that, so I don't need to worry about it, you know. But sometimes anxiety can almost be a way of pretending like we're doing something when we either don't want to or we can't. So I don't know if you know this, there's an election coming up, and people might want an outcome, right? So they might be attached to an outcome, but not have control of the outcome. And then that anxiety can make them feel like they're doing something.
Interesting.
I have a friend who always wants to rope me into these political conversations and get me all worked up. And I'm like, this isn't doing anything. This makes
Are you talking about me?
I maybe not. But it's like, this isn't doing something, right? Go canvas, send a postcard, do a phone bank, and that will actually reduce your anxiety. But otherwise, you have to just detach yourself from the outcome, you know? Or the thing that anxiety does is it says like, oh no, what if this? What if that person gets elected? Oh no, oh no, oh no. But one thing that you can do for anxiety is be like, okay, well, what if that person does get elected? You know, um, then we'll deal with it. You know, we'll deal with it. What if there's a civil war? Okay, well then what an exciting time to be alive. You know, as a helper, as improvisers, you know, the world will need us. You know, how meaningful to be alive at a time. Also, P.S. There's wars happening everywhere in the world and life goes on. You know, like we can't anxiety is about preventing the bad thing from happening. And so as long as you're attached to the bad thing not happening, you can stay anxious, I guess.
I
Right.
think it's interesting to frame it too, is in the terms of like there's uncertainty everywhere, and I think one of the things that improv teaches you right away is that um, you are improvising all the time. You have been already. There's no script for you're going to the gas station or to school or to work or to church or Thanksgiving with your family or whatever. And so you realize that you've been doing this already all the time, and that it's fruitless to try to control the outcome because there are a billion variables. But what it also teaches you, from my perspective, is that how you enter into it matters. If you go in with a positive attitude, going like, look, there's no way to know how this is going to culminate. But I bet if we go in with a good attitude and we work together, like it's gonna be all right. We're gonna figure it out. Um,
Yeah. And I also think that, I mean, I know what you're saying and I agree, but also there are scripts. We do have a script when we go home for Thanksgiving and we see our family, don't we? And the amazing thing about improv is then we're like, I'm not going to do that script again. I'm not going to do it. And that's the amazing thing is that you get on stage and you're so anxious. You're like, oh no, what if I look silly? What if I fail? What if I accidentally like show people who I am? And then in improv, we discover that it's okay to be silly. It's okay to fail. And it's okay for people to see who we are. And then actually, people actually like us more when we show them who we really are, which is insane. I think for a lot of people, especially people growing up in the 80s and 90s, we were taught that there was like somebody we should try to be, and like don't be yourself but be these other people, be this kind of man or this kind of woman. And now it's like, no, just be yourself, and that's what really attracts people. And then when you have that on stage, then you can go home for Thanksgiving and be like, I'm not doing this anymore.
yeah,
uh, which that's the really thrilling thing.
it's deeply empowering. Yeah. I realize that I'm giving anecdotal evidence of the impacts, but we have more than that. For 3 years, the University of Michigan looked at each semester of the Detroit Creativity Project's flagship program, the Improv Project, and how our school programs impact students' mental health, and found a strong impact on reducing social anxiety. Here are just a couple of the things. And again, this is 1 hour per week for a 10-week program, 10 hours of improv training. 45 to 46% of the middle and high school students in our classes self-assessed for social anxiety going in. And at the end of the 10-week course, more than 6 in 10 of those students no longer met that criteria for social anxiety. So putting that in terms that might be more meaningful, if we take the data from the U of M study and extrapolate it out to 1,000 students, that would mean about 460 kids were experiencing social anxiety. And between 200 and 275 of them were no longer having that feeling at the end of 10 weeks of improv. And Tiger, I remember when we began this program, I guess my most distinct memory of your reaction was at the end, because we got the data and it seemed great. And I was like, oh, cool. And you sat me down and you were like, no, this is science. This is important. This was well constructed. This wasn't like, did you like it? Thumbs up, thumbs down, scale of 1 to 10 kind of stuff. This was a scientific study where kids answered questions, not saying, do you have social anxiety? They answered other questions. Talk a little bit about what went into all of that.
um Yeah, that was a long time ago. I don't remember everything. But yeah, but we use real scales that real psychologists use for, real scholarly publications. And yeah, these are this is how real, people get diagnosed by their psychologists and their psychiatrists. And it's insane that in a school day for 1 hour after 10 weeks, they, so many people didn't meet criteria anymore. And this is something that I should have looked up, but I believe y'all can look it up. I believe that's better than medication. I believe that's better than therapy. Um, it's unbelievable. Except for improvisers, like we understand, you know. But
Why do
even
we
that is
understand?
more robust than I expected.
Yeah. So talk about why you think that is. Why does this work? What about learning to improvise uh, has such a deep impact?
Well, I think one of the reasons why it was so robust in this setting is because I think that, these kids are young,
Mm,
and they may not have had like their brains are so plastic, and they may not have had anyone tell them like go ahead and be silly,
right.
go ahead and fail. And so when you get somebody so young and so malleable, and you give them this thing that's like so thrilling. I remember as an adult, the first time I improvised and just like, what is this? This is changing my life, Um, and I think a lot of people have had that experience, right? But you give it to somebody young, and they can be like, oh, I don't have to keep myself in this cage. What else can I rethink? What else can I do? How else am I holding myself back? And it changes everything. And it
I th-
also changes the way they relate to themselves, right? I feel like there's a lot of things in this world, including improv, that reveal ourselves to ourselves, where you're like, I don't know if I can do that. And then you do it. You think, oh no, I'm going to fail. And then you just sort of say something, and it ends up being amazing. And it's like, oh, I did that. Oh, maybe I can do more than I thought. And so it fundamentally changes how you think about yourself. And I feel like with social anxiety, I used to have social anxiety, and it was, again, this thing that I wanted, that I was attached to. I want these people to like me, but I don't
mhm,
have control over that. And before, I didn't really like myself. And so, how is somebody going to like me when I don't like myself? Right.
Precisely. Yeah.
And so now I like myself, and I'm like, I have a lot to offer. And, I feel like I have a table, and I have seats at my table, and I'm going to put it out there. And if people want to come sit at my table, great. And if they don't, they can walk and leave a space for somebody who wants to be here. So, when I'm making new friends now, first of all, I don't make a lot because my table's pretty full. But I'm like, I put it out there. I give them like the worst, cringiest parts of me, because I'm like, if you don't like it, then great, better that I know it now, you know?
Yeah.
And so it's like the opposite of social anxiety now after improv.
I used to have anxiety, not necessarily clinically, but about meeting people who had expertise or lives that I didn't understand. I could meet an astrophysicist, and I wasted a lot of my life until I started improvising, shutting down those conversations because I felt inadequate and dumb and weak and whatever because I didn't know what they were talking about. So somebody would say something, I go, "Okay, great, thank you." Like that's enough, and I'd shut it down immediately. And the second I started improvising, it made me realize like I'm not at fault for not knowing that stuff yet. How would I? You don't emerge from the womb with the full accumulation of all human knowledge. You only can get that by being curious and asking questions. And so immediate, like a 180 happened where I became a more curious, more interested, and I think therefore more interesting person that would go to people and go, oh my gosh, I don't know anything about that. Tell me everything. And people love telling you what they love and what they know a lot about. And it made me make friends more readily. It reduced fear. You talked about failure earlier, and improv certainly is about experiencing failure and having the realization that failure is neither a lasting nor fatal condition. When you're going to mess up, improv is impossible. It's not possible. You walk off the back line into a scene with the word spatula as your guide. We can't read each other's minds. So you walk off with a good heart and good intentions, and you see what comes of it, kind of thing. But it's ultimately impossible. You're going to fail, and then you do, and you go, "Wow, that was awful." but I'm not awful and you're not awful. And you try it again and it sucks a little bit less the second time and a little bit less after that. And you really become fairly fearless about entering into the unknown. I hear the term with regard to our study and the people that have talked about it. Beth, by the way, for everyone, put a link, I think, in the chat for the complete study. But it's been in Psychology Today, and NPR picked it up. We were on Good Morning America talking about this, and I hear a lot about the term acceptance of uncertainty as a principle in mental health. That seems to relate a lot to what we're talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's everything about life, right? Life is totally uncertain. And that's what all the religions are trying to get at, right? The Buddhists want you to be unattached, and the religions with the deity want you to trust the deity. And it's all about how do we deal with uncertainty. And
Hmm.
I think improv absolutely does that, right? Because it is uncertain and it's fun, you know
Yeah, that's
and
so fun.
part of this is improv and part of this is me as a therapist, but like I really don't believe in failure anymore. I believe okay, that was a successful experiment, now I know that that doesn't work.
Hmm.
But I really don't believe in failure. I really don't believe in judgment. If somebody's doing something that like maybe I would have judged in the past, it's like, oh, I just don't understand. I don't understand what is going to make them do that, right? um,
Hmm.
or oftentimes I feel bad for them, right? Some horrible people in the world, it's like, oh, that's terrible, nobody wants to live like that, they must have had these horrible things happen to them, right? um,
Hmm.
and yeah, I think improv gives you the space to just live in this world where your body is telling you the stakes are high, right? I Before every single show, I was always like, I hate this. Why am I doing this? I'm never doing this again. I'm never doing this again. I may have thought that before talking to you today. And then, you get out there and your body's like, oh my gosh, you're going to die. And then you
Right.
don't. And then you realize like all of life is that, because at the end, we are going to die no matter what we do. And so
Wait, hang on.
it's fine. Like whatever it is fine, and you can always try again. You can always course correct. Um, it's funny that my partner and I may have overdone this a little bit with our son, because when he was in like I think sixth grade, I said to him like, "Hey, you need to like work a little harder at school, buddy." And he's like, "Oh, really?" And I'm like, "Yeah." He's like, well, I don't really like it. And I'm like, yeah, but it's kind of important, like think about how hard you work to craft a good joke. Like you craft it, you think, you wait, and then you deliver it, right? And he's like, yeah. I'm like, do you work that hard at school? And he's like, oh no, I don't. And I'm
Yeah.
like, okay, well, you need to do that so you get into college and all this stuff. And he's like, well, if I don't get into college, I'll just try again. And I'm like, oh no, like I've nope, doesn't work like that, buddy. Sorry, I've given you a little too much of it's gonna be okay. You can try again. I need to reel
Hmm.
that back. But so then I explained, like, if you work super hard, then when your smart kids are going off to four-year schools, you will go off to a four-year school. And if you don't, then you can stay at home and you can go to a two-year school, and then later you can go to a four-year school. And if you work even less, then you can just get a job, and it'll take longer, but and like any of those are great paths.
Sure.
But I think you want to go to a four-year school when your smart friend Micah goes. So you may want to try harder. But the beautiful thing about improv is that as a parent, I'm not freaking out telling him he has to go to a four-year school,
Right.
because he doesn't. He
There's
doesn't
no
have to
one
go to,
accepted outcome.
he doesn't have, yeah, he doesn't have to go to an Ivy League. He doesn't have to go to a UC. He doesn't have to go to college. He can live his life however he wants. Uh,
Hmm.
yeah, and so that's beautiful.
That's great. That makes me think of the recent years of the pandemic. I think must undeniably have an impact in a rise in the mental health crisis that is anxiety and social anxiety. All the people students, but everybody had simply fewer reps, fewer interactions with other humans.
Yeah, I think, I mean, even while we were doing it, I was like, oh my gosh, like I just I want to read the studies now that we're going to find, 20 years from now. And
Yeah,
the beautiful thing about humans is we can always develop, right? So like, is it ducks? They'll imprint on somebody and then that's it. That's the person that they follow for the rest of their lives. I think it's a duck.
I don't
But
know.
people, like, there are some critical stages. Like if you don't learn to talk at a certain time, it's really hard to do later. And so there are some critical periods. But for the most part, you can catch up. It will just be harder. But yeah, I think it's going to be wild. Like, if you were in some of the, like, I think adolescents had it the worst, right? Because just when you're 14, 15, and you're supposed to like stop orbiting around your family and start orbiting around your friends, then you're in lockdown and you can't get out, and so I
Right.
think like that's going to be really hard on them. As an adult, I was surprised at how quickly I adapted to the pandemic and then how quickly I adapted back. But I was relatively healthy during that time, right? So I think for people with any sort of like agoraphobia or social anxiety or any of these things where they're not, it was already a little precarious. Yeah, I think it's just made everything harder.
Interesting that you say that. I found myself when lockdown happened, I immediately was like, well, this isn't super different from my normal life. But I've had difficulty transitioning out of it because I still, within even a year ago, was waking up in the morning thinking to myself, well, you're not allowed to go anywhere or do anything, so don't plan anything or whatever. And legitimately had to like seek the help of a mental health professional to break that cycle because it was deeply entrenched. Like it was something that I, had trouble getting out of. Talk, Tiger, a little bit about phones and social media as things that contribute to a sense of isolation.
Yeah, yeah. Well, good for you, getting the help you needed.
Thank
Um,
you. It's a work in progress.
aren't we all? Yeah, it's insane. I can't believe, I know how bad the phone is, and I can't believe how addicted I am. Like I only do Instagram and I only do it while I brush my teeth.
Oh,
Um,
wow.
so that's that. So I'm on it, but not too much. Sometimes I brush them for a good long time. Um, that's the only time I do it, mostly. And then it's interesting that if I find myself doing it some other time, then I'm like, oh, this is interesting. I treat it as a symptom. Oh, Tiger,
Mhm.
what are you avoiding? What are you stressed out about right now? Why are you going on Instagram in the middle of the day? Because it's absolutely an addiction. We're all totally addicted to it. You know, I personally think it's terrible for kids. Um, I know there are some studies that say like, well, a phone is a tool and it's like anything else, and I suppose, but kids don't have a frontal lobe, the executive functioning that tells them when to do things and helps to regulate the rest of the brain. I have one of those and it's fully functioning and it's still really hard on me. So yeah, if parents want to be the frontal lobe for their kids and want to really be on top of when and where and how and all the things and all the limits, then sure, I suppose it could be a tool like any other. Um, but it's horrendous. It's so bad. And I think one of the things that's really hard is that everything in life is easy now, right? It's easy to get food, it's easy to get
Mm.
places, like everything is easy. And so, I remember before microwave, when like if you were going to cook something, you had to cook something. Now you have a frozen burrito, which is delicious in 30 seconds. Like it's insane. And so, and so it's the work is where we're supposed to get our dopamine, right? We're
Mhm.
supposed to work. We're supposed to walk. We're supposed to move our bodies. We're supposed to do all these things to get those reinforcing chemicals in our brain. But now we can just pick up the phone and immediately we feel reinforced. And how do you break that? It's so hard, but then and then you end up feeling terrible because you didn't really do anything. right? It's
Yeah.
insidious, um, but it's so easy to do. Then how do you put it down to go do something? And this is me as an adult, as a 45-year-old adult, but you have a child who didn't spend 40 years learning how to do things and how to regulate dopamine in the proper way. So their brain is developing, expecting this thing. And then
Yeah.
how do we tell them to like go outside and play or like write their college applications when their brain is just like, I literally can't, you know?
The process, I think, is so important. As you say, the work is what, is meant to give us that high. And I think the flip side of this is that every moment that anybody, but especially a school age student, is on a phone, they're not interacting with another human being. And
Yes.
also, I think a real pitfall of social media is that people are presenting unreality. People are putting up their most perfect moments or whatever and making it look effortless. And so you get out of bed in the morning going, well, I'll never live up to that. Like, that person is the ideal in whatever direction, fitness or wealth or fashion or sports or what have you. And they're putting up this completely manufactured, glossy version of themselves, which is just not real.
Yeah. And we know that, but kids, teenagers, even if you tell them that and even if they believe it cognitively, viscerally, like we haven't evolved to handle this, so viscerally it doesn't mean anything to them.
Yeah. Yeah. We're going to start taking your questions in about 7 or 8 minutes. So if you have questions so far, please put them in the chat. Um, it, I've been doing a lot of press for the Detroit Creativity Project recently, back in Detroit especially, and I found myself saying that one of the enormously valuable parts of improv is that it's legitimately practice at being a human. In the course of doing an improv set or a class or whatever, you're going to play old people and young people and smart people and dumb people and nice people and mean people, and you're putting yourself in someone else's shoes, and it teaches perspective, and it ratchets down anxiety, and it teaches empathy. You're seeing things from other people's perspectives, and it's just, I don't know. I At one board meeting, the board of directors of the Detroit Creativity Project would not let me add the clause to our mission statement, which is that we empower and inspire the youth of Detroit through the art form of improvisation, comma, the one true faith. Um, just saying some cults are good. Tiger, what are some simple improv techniques or tools that people can use by themselves at home, at school, in work, especially with an eye towards the young people around us?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. Well, I'll tell you a couple that I use all the time. One is Feel Your Feet. So that's Viola Spolin. That was probably Neva Boyd. But yeah, if you're ever anxious, if you feel your feet, then it helps you to like be in your body. I mean, it's an embodiment exercise, but your feet are really, they're the hardest thing to feel, right? Because they're so far away from where we think we live.
Describe it. What is the exercise?
So as you're learning it, you can do it like in a spacewalk, where you're like feeling all the things and then you feel your feet. But as I sit here now, as you sit there, feel your feet. Are they warm? Are they cold? Mine are a
Mhm.
little sweaty. I can tell that. Feel your socks, feel your shoes, feel your feet on the floor, or and you just, as you get in touch with your feet, you're immediately more present, right? Um,
Mhm.
Another one that I enjoy is oh, I can't remember who said it, but if you're not having fun, you're the asshole, basically, right? If you're on stage and you're like, oh, I didn't want to play with this guy, it's like you're doing improv. Have fun. Find a way to have fun,
Susan Messing says the chat.
Yes. Thank you, thank you. And and I feel that way in life. Sometimes you go to a party and you're like, oh my gosh, I'm stuck talking to this guy. And it's like, find the game in the scene, find a way to have fun. So this is a game that I play when I do go to like kids' birthday parties and I'm like, oh my gosh, I don't want to do this. Then I'm like, all right, like, here's the game. How do I make this guy talk to me about something I'm interested in? How do I find it? So sometimes it's like, what's the easiest thing that you cook for your kids? Or I don't know, what's your favorite thing at Trader Joe's? You know, like, but like my goal is to find a way to make you interesting to me, right?
Hmm.
So yeah, and find the game in the scene. This is something that I'm teaching my 12-year-old now, who's starting to be kind of like surly and grumpy. He's dealing with existential angst for the first time and all this stuff. And he's
Is that
just,
young? Is that old for
it's a little young.
kindergarten?
He
Okay, it's
develops a
young.
little early, yeah. So he's
Okay.
he's a little early. But yeah, like he's dealing with death and isolation and meaninglessness. And I mean, not, I mean, I'm a psychologist. So, but I'm talking to him about,
Sorry, finish that sentence. So it's your fault? What do you mean?
I'm gonna see what it is, where another
Oh, I see.
parent might just be like, this guy's cranky all the time. I'm like, well, he's cranky because his 7-year-old brother is still enjoying all the kid things and he doesn't enjoy that anymore, but he's not yet an adult yet. And we've lost all the third spaces in our society. Google it if you don't know what I'm talking about.
I
Um,
don't.
anyway, so I'm like, yeah, you have to find the game in the scene. What is the game? How can you live life now? How can you play with something now? So those are a couple that I use the most for myself.
That's great. I have a question here. Are there some specific things you would like to see us do as educators or community or policymakers that would shore up mental health, especially among American kids?
I mean, honestly, the people who are on this chat, I think you're already doing it. I remember I did go to a classroom once of somebody who read all the Viola Spolin teacher books. And
Hmm.
every time somebody in the class would talk, everybody would turn their knees to that student. And I think that it was just so beautiful that and this was like second graders, that like everybody must have felt so listened to, and no matter what their parents or whoever they lived with, how much they listened, they knew that if they were going to talk in class, everybody, turn your knees, kids, everybody was going to turn and listen to that person, right? And some of the like get down, right? Like hey Mark, do you know this one? Hey
I
what? Hey
don't.
Mark, hey what? Show us how you get down. No way. Show us how you get down. Okay. And then now you dance. D-O-W Den, that's the way he gets down. D-O-W-N, that's the way he gets down. And then
I
you
love
say
it.
like, hey Tiger. And so I'm dancing and then everybody does what I do. And I think like on a visceral level, that stuff is like so good for humans, so good for kids.
Yeah. That's something that we've seen and had reported back to us by students in the improv project that and by teaching artists that say like early in the class some kids have earbuds in and their hoods up or whatever, and then they're like, great, we need two people up for this first exercise, and they can't get early on can't get people to do it. And when you learn that you are necessary, that you have a voice, that you're going to be listened to, that your ideas are going to be validated and accepted. You realize that you're a necessary part of the conversation, that your voice matters, and that you have a sense of belonging. Like it makes people um, realize that they're needed and already prepared with everything that they require to be a part of the conversation. And I haven't shared this in this group, and it's not a perfect anecdote, but throughout the 12 years that we've been doing this, kids who have otherwise skipped school that day have been caught sneaking into our improv programs, which is, I think it says a little something about what they're getting from it, that it gives them a sense of belonging. It's a place that they feel like they can be themselves, that their ideas are going to be accepted. Um, Improv is good for everyone. I was saying to Tiger before we joined the call that I found myself saying to news stations in Detroit a few weeks ago that improv is really only good for anybody that ever has to deal with another human being. It's good for old people and young people, and it doesn't matter if you ever have hope of being a comedian or on a stage or a writer or director or anything like that. Every profession, every age should take an improv class. Please look around if you, in whatever city you are, chances are there's somewhere to get started on this journey, because it will improve your life and you'll make the best friends, because when you're vulnerable in front of people and you fail together briefly and benignly, um, I don't know, it's a boot camp. You come out the other side transformed, a little bit fearless and kinder. It's kind of the
Yeah.
best.
Yeah,
Um,
and I think it's like, well, how does that happen? How does that work? Why would somebody sneak back into school? What is it that makes the kid with the earbuds in take the earbuds out? And as a psychologist, I think that when we're young, sometimes in traumatic ways, sometimes in non-traumatic ways, but our family communicates to us what we're allowed to do and
mm,
and what they're willing to tolerate and what parts of us they're willing to entertain, right? And so again, some kids it's super traumatic, some kids less so. Um, but like you know, for me, when I was a kid, they didn't want my silliness. They didn't want my exuberance. I was the youngest child and they were over it. And
yeah,
so there was no playfulness. There was a lot of stuff that they didn't, and I was really extra. I still am very extra. They had no tolerance for that, very dramatic. They didn't want that. And so, and being trans, that was super complicated. So there was a lot of parts of me that I just like locked away.
yeah,
And then when I started to improvise, it was like, oh, there's a space for this, you know? And this happened. Another way to think about this is like if you have something like disappointing happen, but you can't deal with the disappointment at the time, those feelings will just wait. Any sort of feelings, they'll just wait if you can't deal with it at the time. And then later, you know, somebody will disappoint you in a small way, but you'll have this big reaction because those feelings were just waiting, you know?
yeah.
And so I think in the healthiest people, those parts of us are just waiting. They're just waiting for a place where they can be nourished and they can come out and play and they can develop. And so that's why it's so powerful that somebody would sneak back into school because there's a part of their very self that gets nourished and they know that they need that, you know.
That's so great. Thank you, Tiger. Beth, have you some questions to share with us?
Yes, yeah, we do. Thank you both so much. I have to say that again. So here's a question about this is for you, Tiger. Experience using improv tools managing borderline personality disorder. I believe this is coming from a clinician, maybe in Bangkok.
I haven't done it yet, but I think it'd be great, and I think with borderline people, what's her name? You know her name. I can't think of it, but she
Susan
talks,
Messing.
no, not that one. She talks about how you've got to deal with the behaviors that end their life first, right? So make sure they're not suicidal, and then the behaviors that end therapy first, right? So you would have to have super clear boundaries about what is and isn't allowed in the theater, and make sure they get enough outside time with the therapist. Maybe do like a DBT model where they have the Marshall Linehan, thank you, where they have the improv once a week and then the therapy once a week, and then any sort of therapy derailing behaviors is just like, we can't have it. But I think it'd be great, and I think that if you could hold the frame super tightly, I think it'd be amazing. I think it'd be amazing. Yeah, now you make me want to do it. Maybe I will.
That it does tie into the question about legitimacy, which is, in cases you addressed it right here, that there are cases where improv isn't an adjunct to therapy. Combining the two together. There was a question about, what kind of training would you need if you were going to do this, just leading improvisation for some of these things.
Well, I think that just doing improv is therapeutic, but if you're going to work with severe clients, or if you're going to work with clients who don't who have a hard time regulating their behavior and regulating their emotions and things like that, then it helps to be a clinician so you can kind of see what's happening before it happens, so you can like be their frontal lobe, if so you can help manage their symptoms and the improv, right? Because I think for somebody who just knows improv, then you don't know how to manage somebody's symptoms, and so then but if somebody's not having symptoms that are interfering with the improv, then maybe it's fine, you know.
There's another question here about using improv training, the idea of using improv training and the effectiveness of it for people who have neurodivergent conditions. So like ADHD, and just wondering if there is anyone doing research into this, if you've come across that.
I know Jim Ansaldo, I think, at
Yes.
the University of whatever,
Indiana.
Indiana.
Yes.
Yeah, he's been doing it for a while with people with autism, and it's amazing. It's absolutely amazing. So yeah, there you go. So yeah, I think hi Patrick. I think yeah, I think I think it'd be good for everybody. And the beautiful thing about it is it meets you wherever you are, you know, and
Yeah.
wherever your holes are in your development, it finds them and it cures them and it heals them, and all you're doing is playing. And that's what play does. All play is magical, you know. But you know, improv is the one true faith.
It's canon now. A doctor said it.
Yeah, there you go.
There's a question here that's about, maybe some best practices for emotional safety in the classroom. So how might that practice be different working with children versus adults? And I think maybe you address some of this in terms of being able to understand the limits of where you can manage somebody's symptoms.
Yeah. Yeah. And you just, I mean, I think try it. Try it. You know, I was telling Mark that I did it with people with schizophrenia, and I was surprised at some of the stuff they could do, and I was surprised at some of the stuff they couldn't do. You know, with a lot of people, like word association is the easiest thing, and you just start there. But what we found is because they have so much happening in their head, either delusions or hallucinations, their word association was to their delusion or their hallucination, and so it didn't work. So it was like, oh, that's fascinating. This is normally the easiest thing. That didn't work. So we stopped the game and started something else, you know. But it was amazing some of the stuff that they could do, and like I knew they would be able to, but my other facilitators were like, I don't know, and they were amazing. They were amazing. One of the facilitators who had worked with these people for years said, I had never seen that guy smile in the years, and I had never heard that woman's laugh in like the years I'd been working with them. Pretty
Yeah.
amazing.
I have another question here that I think also is relevant to what happens in classrooms. So this is specifically about a work situation and about how for maybe improv, what role might improv play for someone who has anxiety, and how might it help maybe increase their influence, or say in a work situation where there's conflict. So how might we use improv in a situation where there's conflict at work, and then, does it play a role in maybe helping people who have anxiety, if I understand the question?
Yeah, I think that improv opens us up, right? And part of my dissertation, in order to make the model, I had to research the theoretical underpinning, but that hadn't been written yet, so I had to write that first. And so I took everything that was out there and I distilled it into yes and, trust and respect, be in the moment, encounter, there are no mistakes, and let go. And I feel like, if you can come into an encounter with somebody and really encounter them, you're much more likely to have a better outcome, right? If you can really be in the moment, if you can really listen, if you can really trust, maybe you don't trust them, but if you can really respect that person and you treat people in that way, then you're much more likely to get a better outcome, right? And if you can let go, and be detached from the outcome, then then that willingness and that openness, they will experience that too. So yeah, I don't know if that answers the questions or not, but I think it helps with everything. I don't know. What do you think, Mark?
I mean, I know that it helps with everything. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, as you say, improv, you open yourself up. You allow yourself to enter the unknown and to, the number of times I was surprised with what emanated from my own subconscious while playing a game that needed, or an exercise that needed rapid reaction and you couldn't say the same thing twice. And, it absolutely, first of all, it's a field leveler. Like I often say about our classes, going back to the DCP, there are no cool kids, there are no jocks and nerds and whatever in an improv scene. Like everybody's gotta, you're gonna play all those archetypes potentially, but it's a field leveler. Like everybody is necessary in the scene, and there are no principals and secondaries in those things. And I just found that as a wallflower, late blooming C- student from nowhere outside Buffalo, New York, like I found that hugely empowering. For me, it happened when I was 25. And that's why I'm so pleased to be able to share this with kids, 3 to 18, through the work that we're doing.
We have one last question here, and it's about using improv in recovering from trauma. And I don't know if that's something that can be answered in a few minutes, but if that's something that you've used improv techniques for. I know, Tiger, you work with a relief team that goes out in situations where people have experienced trauma.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's hugely helpful in trauma. The Body Keeps the Score is a great book. Highly recommend The Body Keeps the Score for anybody, but especially clinicians. Bessel van der Kolk wrote it, and he talks about improv. I don't know. Does he talk about improv or theater? I don't know. Same thing. For these purposes, but the community and all the things, and I do think that it would even be more helpful than regular theater, although there's plenty of improv in regular theater. Yeah, but it's about the community. It's about opening up. It's about breaking the ways you're, making your neurons fire in new ways. And yeah, he does mention improv. Yeah. And it's about all the things, Yeah, that's very inarticulate.
No, I think, just that is one of the things we hear most from students. I mean, probably the number one thing we hear from students, especially starting in 2020, is that improv class is the place where I can belong.
Yeah.
Improv class is where I find friends. So,
yeah, and when you have that early trauma where your self splits off, and then you have this place where it can come back and you can learn to reclaim it, and you can test out all these different parts and all these different things. I was going through the Second City Training Center when I was going to therapy, and I tested out a lot of stuff, and it was wildly healing in a way. I talked about it so much in therapy, because I did this and then this happened, and then I thought this was going to happen, but this happened, and like it's changing everything. So yeah.
Yes, I wanted to say thank you to you, Dr. Tiger Veenstra, for this time, and to all of you on this call. This is a conversation that we'd really like to continue, and to hear more from you. You can check out our website to learn more about our programs. It's DetroitCreativityProject.org or DCPimprov.org. You can find out more about what we do and donate if you so choose. You'll have contact information there too. Once again, this has been recorded, so we'll have it available on our YouTube channel at some point, and I think all of that can be found at DCP Improv or DetroitCreativityProject.org as well. Thank you, Tiger. Thank you, Beth. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mark and Beth. Thank you, everybody. This is so fun.